to order. It's about 4 or 5 minutes after noon, and we'll start with roll call.
Forrest Dunbar, Anchorage Assembly.
David Nesbitt, Board of Ethics.
Jackie Yeagle, Clerk's Office.
Rosella Young, Assembly Council. I'm just taking notes for Julia. She's not here today.
Barbara Jones, Municipal Clerk.
Dennis Wheeler, Resource Data, here on behalf of the Municipal Clerks Vote by Mail Project.
Amanda Moser, Clerk's Office.
And I'm Pete Peterson, Chair. We'll go to the Board of Ethics update first.
So what we've done is we have tried to clear our schedule. And so we've gotten through about 10 advisory opinions this year already. And we have issued responses in all of them. I think we're caught up. I don't think we have any lingering, Lisa.
No.
We're all caught up right now. That used to be an issue as far as things lingering and not getting out the door. We're getting those out the door. And then what we've done essentially is cleared our calendar so that we can finish the rewrite. We have a draft that Dee Ennis put together. She essentially spent, I think, an entire week and just dedicated an entire week to drafting a rewrite. It's about 15 pages right now. I know Mr. Trainee wanted it 5. We did the best we could, but it's 15 pages right now. It's draft, and what we are going to do is we have scheduled meetings once a week for our group to meet weekly, starting the 6th, 13th, 20th, and the 27th to go through certain sections of it. And we're going to piecemeal it out and go through as a group, because right now we've all read it, we've seen it, but we haven't had a chance to manipulate or work it at all, or edit it. And so that is our plan for the next 4 or 5 weeks. We're going to take every week and just go through it, the rewrite. Then what we have tentatively scheduled, assuming that our weekly meetings go off as scheduled, then we have tentatively scheduled for 11/3, November 3rd, to have a meeting where we can invite the public, have comments, other people who have interests in it. Assembly Council can join us and give us some feedback. We will then take it back and then edit it accordingly. We'll take those reviews, we'll take those comments and suggestions and either incorporate those suggestions and edits or not, or whatever we decide to do, at least to get some kind of feedback on all of our work. That would be on November 10th. We have a meeting scheduled for us to work on those edits. Then on the 23rd, by the 23rd, we're hoping, that must be right before Thanksgiving, to give a draft of it to the Ethics and Elections Committee for you to do with as you wish, right? I mean, at that point, we propose it, we submit it to you, and then it's up to you, and then the ball's in your court. And if you want to schedule an assembly work session after that, for December or something. The concept that we had here, and the reason that we're compressing this for 2 reasons, is because if we do it monthly, this will go all the way until next summer. I mean, that's the reality of it.
Right.
And part of it's because when you have that kind of break between meetings, and we're all volunteers and we go back to our lives, we come back a month later and we have to spend half of the meeting just getting caught up where we were last time.
Review, right.
So we have agreed as a board to a compressed schedule that will hopefully not only allow us to be fluid and organic in our comments and our edits and our sections so that it happens rapidly, but the concept here also is that we can get it to you much quicker. And hopefully by the end of the holiday, maybe even by the end of the calendar year, that you would have something that you might feel free to or feel confident in introducing as potential legislation. That's the goal that we have on the table. And so that's what we've been working on. That's our update.
All right. Great. Well, I appreciate you clearing off your schedule, getting caught up on your opinions, and us committing to having a meeting every week to do the ethics rewrite. That's above and beyond the call of duty, I think. So, but I appreciate that.
Forrest? I have a question actually for Barbara. Dennis or someone else can chime in about the logistics of that. So once you finish that rewrite, you said it comes back to us, but it hasn't actually been introduced yet, right? So there'll need to be an assembly person. We can't, as a committee, can we as a committee forward it on or put it on the agenda, or does one of us have to sort of take it?
Well, the plan, and I think that Board of Ethics has discussed this, would be that they present it to the committee. We don't typically allow committees to sponsor things,
Right.
but what we do have happen is Mr. Peterson, Mr. Croft, and Mr. Dunbar could sponsor it. And that
Right.
would, my understanding is that is going to be the board's request.
Yeah. And then it would be an ordinance, obviously, sort of standard be introduced probably the following meeting, and then, go through the standard procedure. Probably won't come back here unless people want to do rewrites.
Well, I think the process is uncertain. And we've had a couple of major rewrites of different types of code. I expect this one maybe require a work session for this committee.
Uh-huh.
You may want to take 2 hours and walk through it, with Mr. Nesbitt and perhaps Ms. D. Ennis. I expect you might want to do that. We have had other big rewrites like this that we've had 2 work sessions on. So sometimes we've had 2 public hearings on them, or 3. Mr. Wheeler's laughing. So I'm telling you, I think the timeline is certainly possible, and we could, but I think you need to expect some extra work for you too, as a committee and individuals, if you choose to sponsor this.
Okay.
And,
What issue sponsored?
The Board of Ethics rewrite.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I've been waiting for this for a while.
May I just quickly summarize?
Yes,
Just very
please do.
briefly for Mr. Trainee, because we've, this started, a year or so ago, year and a half ago, when we started working on this. And where we're at right now is we've essentially gotten current on all of our advisory opinions. We've had 10 this year. They're all out the door. They're done. We've cleared our calendar. We've set up weekly meetings for the next month to go through. We have a draft in hand that D. Ennis sat down and rewrote. And I was just saying that I know you wanted it 5 pages. It's slightly longer than that, but not much.
It's not up to 55 pages.
No,
Okay.
no, we're at 15 right now.
That's
So-
fine.
So,
That's a
but
reduction.
yes, and the concept here is that we've eliminated. It used to be broken into 3 sections for political activity, depending on which section you are. We've compressed all of that down. We have weekly meetings starting on October 6th until the end of October, where we are going to review each section, each chunk,
Each segment of the program.
each segment of the draft that we have, and then by what we're hoping is to have some review and comment, and then back to us, and then we get a draft to the assembly that we are satisfied with, that will go to this group by the end of November, and then at that point it's up to the assembly.
Let me
what
know
they
when your
do.
meetings are, because I intend to be there.
Okay,
I want to see how this process is going.
of course.
And I want to note for the record that Mr. Croft and Mr. Trainee have joined us a couple
Sorry,
minutes
another
ago.
meeting upstairs. I apologize.
No problem. Any other comments or questions about the report from the Ethics Board?
One other comment, and I will talk to Mr. Peterson and perhaps Mr. Dunbar offline. And my recommendation is that we get a work session. Amanda can work with us, possibly to schedule a work session for your committee, and we'll coordinate that with UND, and also to coordinate a couple of work sessions for the full assembly, because I think it might take more than one.
With your whole board, would like your whole board there at the work session with the assembly.
So we'll work together. And I just think it's a good idea to get those calendared now so that we can move forward. Otherwise, it might be January or
And
February.
then you also have a goal in sight.
Mhm.
Yes, that's a
We'll
good
try-
idea, because
we'll
we
try
are
to have
getting,
lunch for you.
getting close to the
You don't
holidays
get
when
paid,
we
you
get to
know that.
November 23rd, so. All right, well, great, thank you for that report.
Yes, absolutely.
Let's go to Dennis for vote by mail update.
Ms. Pearson, the members should have this two-sided handout.
I know what's happening.
So I'll be working off of that.
Thank you.
Wanted to give you an update because there have been some changes to some of the target dates for pieces of the project that we need to advise you about. And then the plan is to also advise the assembly and the stakeholder group that we've been working with. We have basically 3 different RFPs related to this project. The first RFP is what we call the inbound envelope processing. That's where the voter fills out their ballot, puts it in an envelope, and returns it to the municipality. The municipality would send that envelope through a sorting machine / scanner machine that would pick up the voter signature on the outside of the envelope and verify that against the state voter registration database signatures. The timing for the acquisition of that machine is such that that machine would not be in place for the April 2017 election. So a major necessary piece for vote by mail will not be available to the muni because of the time it takes to build the machine, ship it, set it up, run test elections through it, and then have it verified and ready to go for the election. So because that won't be here in time, we need to back a way of trying to make that happen on the grand scale, which actually in many respects is a good thing. We're always on a very tight time frame to make this happen successfully for April 2017. And with any large project, there's always a number of small delays that over time start to add up.
Mr. Trainee.
Barbara, I think we need to do as an assembly to get this notification out. Is there anything we have to change or modify?
Well, I'm not sure that if communications is on the, it's number 8 on here. And so our internal vote by mail team, which is Amanda, Dennis, me, and Jackie Yeagle from the clerk's office, we are working on what that communication is going to look like. And we will be, Mr. Peterson is going to ask Dennis to make a report at your meeting on October 4th. And just so that you know, our focus is going to be, it's positive. You know, we're moving forward with vote by mail. We're going to do vote by mail right. It's really exciting. We've got a snag because of equipment procurement. It's just taken a lot longer than what we had expected. I will say, as Mr. Trainee knows, and Mr. Peterson, I'm not positive if you were at this meeting or not. At the interview, when we hired Dennis, he said, your schedule is very aggressive.
Ambitious.
And so Mr. Hall was the, you know, one of the key motivators. He was the chair of this committee. And he requested the April 17 date, but I think he understood that it was an aggressive deadline, and that was the original one, but I think we're okay. We're going to do this right, and we're going to get it done on April 2018.
Well, the reason I'm asking is I meet with the Federation monthly. So what I intend to do is tell them we're going to do it in 18.
Okay?
To let the Federation know. They can get the message out to people that come to Federation meetings. I just wanted to make sure.
Great. And then could I ask you to invite Amanda to
Okay.
come with you to that meeting?
Yep.
And we'll want to make sure that we've notified the assembly first and our election workers and the stakeholders. That's the plan. And so then if you could invite Amanda, she'll
Third Wednesday in October.
all right.
6 o'clock.
Mr. Crowe.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson.
Well, I'm not ready to go straight from the prior deadline to how we communicate the new one without me understanding a little more about how this deadline slipped. So what is, I know it was aggressive, I remember hearing that. Well, why didn't we make it?
So, okay. So we started this roughly, I think, early February last year. A number of things had to fall in place. We had to make sure we had the money for the project. We had to make sure we developed the RFP and the requirements. We had to make sure we talked to other jurisdictions about what those requirements should look like. We needed to agree on what those functional specs were. We had to put the RFP together. We had to get purchasing to approve the RFPs, post them. We had to address some issues where we had to extend the submittal deadlines.
Why?
Partly because of delays in purchasing.
Sorry,
And those
I'm
delays
not sure
weren't
what you
necessarily dramatic, but it added, I think, 2 weeks. So we had these little things that added a week here, 2 weeks there, and so on, to get through them. The scoring committee had the opportunity to ask for demonstrations if the RFP proposals didn't provide enough detail. The committee chose to go through those demos because you can learn a lot by seeing it. It's like, you have a spec on a car, but until you get to see the car and kick the tires and drive around, you're not sure the specifications the vendors gave you really are going to meet all your requirements. So we went through that process of having the demos. The demos involved bringing the teams up here, so we had to coordinate with the vendors, and that added delay because the vendors have to make sure they can get their team together in here, and their salespeople that are traveling around the country showing these machines off, so we had to give them time to get here. One of our key scoring committee members works for the state. She's in charge of their absentee by mail voting. We had to accommodate her schedule in the middle of her work on the state primary and the state general election, so we had to accommodate that as well. So these things just add up over time, and it just makes little slips become a little longer delay.
So you opened, or I was a little late, but it seemed like you opened with, I saw the beginning of this
Yeah.
with equipment delays.
Right.
So that wasn't what you mentioned there. That was more scheduling and coordination delays.
Right. All of that in terms of acquiring the equipment. The one piece I should add in there is that once we saw the 3 proposals, they gave us a project schedule based on when they could produce the machinery. And that lead time was a little bit more than we had anticipated, so that adds time as well. Because these are not machines that you can necessarily just buy off the shelf, so to speak.
So
Right.
you're
So they're not
suggesting
built until they're ordered.
to go to a vote by mail option and then full vote by mail in 2018? What is vote by mail option?
Yeah, so the modified version of vote by mail is we want to encourage people to take advantage of what's already out there, which is absentee voting, which you can do by mail. So we want to change the conversation a little bit and tell people, look, you can do what we would call now a certain kind of voting by mail. If you want to vote absentee, you can do it by mail. That's always something we've had. If you want to vote early, you could go to a polling location at City Hall, for example, but you can do it by mail. If you have other reasons, for example, just the pure convenience of it, you could vote by mail, but we're not going to be ready to do it on a grand scale. Right now, absentee vote by mail is in the thousands. If we start talking to people about voting by mail, maybe we bump that up a little bit this year so people can get used to the idea of voting by mail, but it's not fully implemented until next year. That does a couple of things. It gives the clerk's office practice, it gets people used to the messaging, it gives us a chance to use the ballot drop boxes that we're putting around town. So it's a nice first step to adopting this full vote by mail process.
Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I guess this question is probably more for Barbara, but so you said you're going to present this on October 4th to the body, is that right?
Well, I think the plan, and this is something that we've talked about in our internal committee, and I believe we've talked to Mr. Peterson about this. Mr. Peterson is going to report at your next meeting about this committee report, and it's my understanding he's going to ask Mr. Wheeler
Okay.
to come forward and make an announcement or to explain some of this.
So, yeah, I think that's great. I think, it would probably take a long time at the mic on Tuesday to explain all the context and to sort of lay out the positive part of this as well. And so I'm wondering if you've considered doing a press release at the same time to sort of lay out what you're describing. So you're going to say it at the mic, but also sort of letting people know. Because I do think that this is an important story, but it's also a very positive story in a lot of ways. And I just want to make sure that kind of comes through if there is going to be media coverage of this.
I think we can certainly add that to our communication plan and discuss that.
My recommendation would be to do it after the assembly meeting, so that the assembly body has the first chance to weigh in on what.
I don't want somebody to read about it in the paper.
Right, yeah, so the second that's,
Amanda?
And just to let you know, some of the other elements of the communication plan that we're working on, and I'm not sure if Dennis was going to talk about this, but we have scheduled, so the assembly meeting's the 4th, and we have scheduled on October 6th to meet with our election stakeholders group. This is a group that we've built since 2015 of engaged citizens, residents of Anchorage. And so we want to make sure we communicate to them because they have been really integral to this entire conversation. And we've also compiled a letter for our election workers. So one thing that we've done too is we've communicated to all of our election workers about this change. They're going to be extremely impacted by it. I think some folks have served with us as election workers since the 50s and 60s. And so this will be a big change for them. So we want to make sure we also have those communications that go out. And we want to make sure that those folks hear from us.
Right. Good, great.
Mr. Peterson, thank you. I asked Jackie to go get the RFP packages, and Mr. Croft, I think you might be interested in taking a look at this. If you, I'll just pass these out. If the one thing that I'll tell you that is I'm so impressed with, it's on these pages right here. It's attachment C and attachment D. And if you look at these tiny little Excel spreadsheets, every single one of these lines is a criteria that each of the proposers was required to respond to and explain how their system would work on this. And if you can take a look at this, you will see, I mean, really, it is absolutely amazing. And I am sure the purchasing department will tell you that our project manager actually put this together between February and when we issued it, and that we got this out to the proposers. I think purchasing would tell you this was fast. And I will just, as another example, we've been working on the meeting manager RFP, which did not work this well, did not work this fast, and actually, I think it's public, the RFP was canceled.
The software for our system.
Right, after over a year. So I'm just gonna pass this to you, Mr. Dunbar, if you and Mr. Croft would like to. I think Mr. Peterson and Mr. Trainee have probably seen it or been exposed to it. But I just wanted to let you know that it was a super intense process and it was a lot of work. I've got the stuff in my office, and each RFP is like about half of a banker's box of material.
Mr. Chairman, how much advance notice did you get that we failed to meet our 17 goal?
We had a meeting about, was it 3 weeks ago, something like that?
We were late August or early September before I.
Yeah, 3-4 weeks ago. And
And that,
you know, and of course, you know, I was disappointed. I knew there was a possibility that we weren't going to be able to meet the deadline. It was just, I think it was better to make sure that we had everything done right and set up and ready to go, and not try to, you know,
so what was stated
make
3 weeks ago?
the deadline just barely in time, you know.
You said there was a meeting, but you didn't say what was said. What was said 3 weeks ago?
Well, just basically what Dennis told us.
That we wouldn't,
Yeah.
or that we likely wouldn't, or we might not? Or
Well, that you wouldn't. In all practical respects, the time frame was just such that you would be high risk. And at the delivery date on the machines, based on what the proposals were submitted, were, see, each proposal was required to identify a high-level schedule that said, assuming they had a contract in place, what was their expected delivery date? Well, your most likely vendors say, well, if we have a contract in place, your most likely delivery is 5 or 6 months out. We don't even have permission to negotiate yet, let alone get to the contract. So
we knew 3 weeks
So-
ago we weren't gonna make it?
yes, sir.
Mr. Trainee?
Then we also have to have the problem of the building. We had to have the building a lockdown, and we finally got that agreed to. And this equipment has got to be put in place so it's permanently there. It's not a erector set. You can do it one week and then move it to another building. Once this gets set up, it's there permanently.
It's a great reference.
What?
I just have
Sorry, it is.
Can I ask a question? This is not mine. I'm curious though. What's the risk of failure? What happens if it doesn't work? What happens if you get a machine that doesn't fulfill all the tasks? Or what happens if you get it all set up, but what's the downstream risk
So
of
the-
failure if it's not put in place properly?
So the biggest thing is you'll have envelopes that are signed by a voter, and you're gonna have to figure out how to verify that that signature is the voter's signature, okay? And so you have no way to sort those in a way. The machine sorts them a number of different ways depending on how you configure. But let's just say for sake of argument, you can sort them by precinct. You can sort them by precinct, then you can pretty quickly go to your precinct books and figure out who that is, because it's got barcodes on it and stuff, right? But right now, if I get it in the mail, I'll see a signature, I might not even be able to read it. I have no idea whose signature that is. And I've got no other identifying information on there that tells me it's all barcoded, right? So now I've got to figure out what kind of manual process could I possibly develop? And you're talking about significant delay in election results, right? Even assuming you can figure out a good system to manually start to try to match these things. And you're going to have, if we have the turnout we'd like to have, let's say you have 100,000 envelopes out of 209,000 registered voters. We just didn't think the public would tolerate delay that could be weeks, right? With uncertainty as to what are the results and what sort of mistakes and errors have you made in this manual process that you could have avoided with the machine.
Forrest?
Mr. Chairman, could we start to move through this? There's a couple points in here I'm really interested, like the ways identified, for example. Can we start to move through this agenda?
Mr. Training?
Just one last thing. 2012, we never want to do that election again. It was a mess. So the care we're putting in this to make sure this is done correctly in 2012 never happens again.
Yeah, so
Because a lot of us will walk out the door if it does. They'll probably go throw us out the door if it happens.
So we have to make sure we do it right the first time.
You
It's
got
just
it.
It's too risky not to, you know. So.
There is no second time.
One other,
Yes.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask Mr. Croft if I could talk to him off the line, and we can show you the reports that we get regularly from our project manager that show risk high, as well as the reports that, oops, sorry, that's me.
That's the same.
The reports that went to the executive steering committee, and we'll just show you those reports so that you understand what information has been reported over the last 6 months to the committees.
Well, and that's to the committee level, and that'd be interesting. I'm trying to figure out how I missed that. I was at the August 31st meeting. That was mainly about Mr. Flynn. But then, was it at the August 24th or the August 31? Because I don't remember this is not going to happen.
I misspoke. It's the executive steering committee for the Vote by Mail project. The executive steering committee is Mr. Trainey, Ms. Gray Jackson, and Mr. Hall. That's who the Vote by Mail group reports to.
Mr. Hall was here for that.
So I can show you those committee reports.
So this committee didn't get a report that said
No.
it's not going to happen.
We're getting it now.
Correct.
Right.
This is the first of that.
Yes.
Right, I attended that meeting, so that's how I found out.
Mr. Chair, I think Mr.
Oh, maybe excused.
David.
Oh, yes, David.
Yeah, I've been fascinated by this discussion. I just need to go back to my office. Thank you.
Thanks for the work.
Hey, thank you.
So we're now up to 15 pages?
Yeah, right. We're trying to
Thank
keep it
you.
low. Absolutely.
All right, Mr. Wheeler, continue on down with this report.
Okay, so RFP number 1, inbound processing. The proposals have been scored. We went through the demonstrations to see what the vendors could do with their equipment. Part of the RFP requires the vendors to score themselves in terms of the functional specs. And after the demonstrations, we compared that to their functional spec scoring. And there are some discrepancies where vendors may have given themselves too high of a score or given themselves too low of a score. So we presented those questions to purchasing. Purchasing sent those out yesterday or the day before and asked that the vendors respond by 10/4. So we get that back on 10/4, we review that, and then we can ask purchasing to go ahead and give us permission to negotiate with the top vendor.
Vendors gave themselves to, don't we give scores based on their data?
It's a two-part process, actually. So we have requirements in terms of experience and references and all those sorts of things scoring committees typically score. And then we also have a series of functional specs. Can your system do this? And if so, is it something that's in your base system, something that you have to configure at what cost, something that MOA users
So in
can
effect, they've
configure?
categorized themselves wrongly, in our opinion. They put themselves in the wrong categories we gave them.
Yes,
And we want to say, you should be in this one higher or lower.
that's right,
Okay.
yep.
And that's on that functional specs page of that
Yeah, attachment D.
Excel spreadsheet that I mentioned to Mr. Croft.
So we'll go through that and get that finished up. RFP number 2, which is a separate piece of machinery and software, if you will, it actually scans the ballots themselves and produces the results. And that gets us away from using AccuVote machines at polling locations to do the same thing. Those have been scored, the demonstrations are all done, and the request for permission to enter negotiations, that's pending. Ron Haddon wants me to use a letter form for him, and so he told me he would send that to me yesterday. I haven't seen it yet, we'll get that done. So we're ready to enter into negotiations on that one essentially, and then when that's done, of course, we'll present to the Assembly for the actual contract award.
Mr. Croft has a question.
Sure.
Yeah, I didn't know whether you wanted me to, sometimes it's less formal when these go directly. So the inbound is looking at the signatures and identifying who this is.
That's right.
Ballot tabulation is doing essentially what AccuVote is already doing, but I assume doing it better and updated. How is RFP2, I know AccuVote, they don't support anymore, so we need to replace it. Is it got any functional difference, reliability difference? What is the difference once we have verified who they are and how RFP2 compared to AccuVote handles counting or otherwise processing the ballots?
A couple of things. One, you're doing it at a central location, so you're not worried about 130 different machines being run by different election officials.
So they don't count them at the
They
precinct.
don't count at the precincts because you're voting by mail, so there's
Oh,
no
that's
precinct
true.
location,
Okay.
right? So they all come into a central location. You have, effectively, you'll have over time more highly trained election officials and a smaller group of them that do this routinely versus your 600 that come and go through all your polling locations.
So much fewer machines counting them instead of.
That's right. That's right.
Did you really mean 600 people, like 100 places?
We have 122
120.
polling locations and 600 election workers.
Yeah.
Yeah, so instead of 122 machines, you have 10.
One.
Right. So here's the envelope, and on the, I'm not probably the best person to do this, but on the back of the envelope, and then there's gonna be a barcode somewhere. And so this is RFP 1, right?
Right.
Yep.
Okay, so then RFP 2 is different. So in between here, we have to open the envelopes and we have to remove the ballots, and you have to obviously separate them from the envelopes, because you don't want to have an identifier. And so there's the machine number 1 is looking at this, right? Because it wants to see that signature and that barcode. And then there's a couple of systems that are going to be checking the signature and then indicating that the person has voted. You know, we got to make sure it's a signature we recognize and that, you know, this isn't John Doe's barcode. So it's pretty interesting. And then the system is really cool. It's got little, some of them have computers that show it up, and it shows like when we adjudicate, you know, so that we say good, bad, needs further review, good, bad. So
Does
so
that
this
barcode follow it to RFP2?
it does not, because the barcode identifies the voter, can't identify the voter.
Right.
So it has to be separate. And this will probably involve election workers and a manual process.
So you actually have a virtual separation there, so you can't tie a person to
Virtual,
their vote.
real. I mean, you.
Well, I was going to say,
barcode's
I was going to say there's the virtual in terms of software,
Yeah.
but there's also a real separation, and in fact, most jurisdictions physically separate their room between the two.
Is there
Right.
any way, court order, whatever, to disentangle that? That is, I understand why you would not want it to be a normal feature and you'd want it to be pulled apart. is there any way, if court said Jane Doe was a fraudulent vote, I want you to pull it, that it can reach over that line and do that?
No, what happens is you either have somebody who shouldn't be voting here, but you have no idea how they voted, so they're qualified or disqualified without any knowledge of how they voted. So that happens here, step one, and that voter has the opportunity to challenge that assessment.
Yeah, I know, but later it's
And then
been
over here-
counted, I cannot, I just,
No way.
it is not just virtual like you said, but
Right,
really
right,
disassociated.
Right. What we need to do is everything we can possibly in every way in terms of procedures and physical workflow and so on, so that there is no way to tie those back together.
And then this machine is just a, it's a scanner. And it's.
That's why I asked about that. It doesn't seem like that is any different than a big updated AccuVote. Or is it, does it have some, that was my question, Barbara, does it have some functionality or difference at RFP2 that is better than a more reliable, up-to-date, and serviceable AccuVote?
Amanda?
If it's okay, I'd be
Yeah.
happy to respond to that. So AccuVote, the state purchased them in 1998. It uses optical scan technology. The stuff that we are seeing, this current technology, is digital scans. So a lot of these equipment, it's digital scans of the ballot. So you have not only the physical paper ballot, but you also have a record of all the scans. And Barbara was mentioning earlier that on the screen you see the scans, and if you see a voter that maybe made a mistake, so they voted for two candidates, but you can see that they crossed off the one, you could adjudicate that and put the vote for the candidate that wasn't crossed off. Or if there was a write-in candidate, you could adjudicate that and track the different write-in candidates. So it is much advanced technology. AccuVotes scan ballots at a very slow pace. Oh gosh, I don't even know. I don't even know. A lot of the stuff that we're seeing is scanning ballots at hundreds of ballots a minute.
And
So
keeping
it's-
that optical record.
Yeah, and
And
one way to describe that is when the AccuVote runs into trouble with scanning a ballot, what typically happens is the workers have to take the original ballot and a blank ballot and physically transpose all the votes that should be counted and then run that anew. With a system like this, you don't have to do that. You can do it right there on the software.
Mr. Training?
Amanda, would you tell Mr. Croft the problems with AccuVote now?
I
Just,
don't
it's like, I just want you to hear the.
I've
it's like
heard
the
that.
question.
Well, I mean, you can tell me whatever you want. You know, Amanda
Well, I
can
want
too,
you to know
but
why we're abandoning it.
I know why we're abandoning it. That wasn't
I
my
mean,
question.
it's obsolete, you have to get spare parts when you can find them, the batteries aren't
I think I
available
said
anymore.
that twice in my question.
Okay? Just trying to bring you up to date.
The other thing that this machine does is it provides sorting. So if you have overvotes where somebody's voted for more than one candidate in a race, or write-ins, you can sort them out, physical ballots, so they're a little easier to track than if you were to try to hand sort things that, because at the AccuVote machine, the precinct level doesn't do that kind of sorting.
I mean, in fact, Mr. Trainee, so what are we going to be doing in 17? AccuVote, I mean, so
Regrettably.
that's part of, I know it, and I'm disappointed that we're going to be using those same machines one more year. And I don't think that the public's going to take spinning that as a success. Because I know all the faults with those machines. We deal with it at the state level as well. Are we going to be able to get the parts and reliability that one more year will be successful on our old system? I understand what the risk of why it might not be successful on the new system. Are we going to have difficulties of making an old system limp along one more year?
Go ahead.
The short answer is you will have some
Yeah.
problems. But
Mhm.
the way the problems were addressed last year, for example, was that where a precinct machine failed, the clerk's office reran that precinct here. And we had four, I can't remember what your number was.
We identified early on, at the beginning of March, we do AccuVote and ballot testing as part of our elections procedures, and we identified really early on that there were challenges just in the testing phase of the machines. And so we worked to develop procedures as to quickly react to those challenges. And so on election day, we had some extra workers available to be able to run out extra machines and extra memory cards. And we did have quite a few memory cards fail and a handful of AccuVote machines fail. And so we were able to react and bring stuff out. And there was, I think, 2 scenarios, maybe 3, where we did actually rerun entire precincts back here at City Hall on election eve, because they had AccuVote failures substantially that they weren't able to work it at the polls.
We're 1 o'clock, and I'm not trying to slow this meeting down, but I do think the important thing for the oversight committee, which is what this functions as you guys do your job, is to understand, Mr. Dunbar said he's satisfied, I'm not yet, whether the risks of using the old system, which are articulable and real, are greater than the risks of getting a new system, which I understand are predicted and very, very possible. Tell me in a sentence or two, no more than a paragraph, any of you, why the risks that we will and the problems we'll have in the old system are worse than the ones we'll have in the new.
The problem is that you won't have the new machine in time.
Just
So,
won't, not it will
just-
be with
so-
less training than we wanted
The-
or whatever, just won't be.
Just won't be here, set up and tested, ready to go. Now, is there some scenario where that could happen? Maybe. But right now, every indication is it won't be here in time, based on what they've said they can do. The fact that we don't even have the contract yet, hasn't been awarded. For all I know, what if another vendor challenges? Then you're stuck, right? And the problem is, for an election, you can't have that uncertainty going into January, February. You need to have certainty now because, among many other things, you've got to have 600 election workers ready to go and start your training in January. So you just, because of the time it takes to ramp up under the old way, we can't wait to see what's going to happen on the new one. And right now, there's just, all of our projections put it out beyond April anyway. So even assuming all the stars are aligned and, oh, by the way, we paid a premium to get the machine here even sooner, we don't know that any of that's going to happen over the next 30 to 60 days. So we need to talk to you guys now about the likelihood that 2017 is not going to be truly fully vote by mail.
It's not going to be any different than before. You can encourage more absentee, but it's really just what we had plus an emphasis on absentee.
Well, you'll have the RFP2 tabulation system, which will be better. You'll have an election center, which will be more efficient. You'll have the drop boxes, will make dropping off your ballot, if you choose to vote that way, more convenient. You'll have many of the aspects, and you'll hit all of
We'll
the
have that
practice related to it.
RFP2 in Central, and we'll still have AccuViews out there wherever,
Able to
but we'll
use
have
that second RF.
the
Yeah.
RFP2 in Central? No,
You
we won't have any
can,
aspect.
you can, if.
So that could come, but what?
I know, I'm freaking Amanda out.
Yeah.
But the truth is, if she wanted to do absentee, you could do it here. So
A
the idea is-
meld of two different systems?
We've talked about practicing with this.
That
So
would
I'm
be-
saying it's a possibility. Now, the clerk's office may say, nah, I don't want to do that. That's fine, but.
So, the way that option would work, which we have explored, Mr. Croft, is then at all of the polling locations, because we would still need to set up a polling location, is that everybody would not run their ballots through the AccuVote machines. They put them in the emergency slot. So none of the ballots at 122 locations would be processed. They'd come back to Election Central and then have to be processed. So there are risks with that too. Risks of people accusing us of fraud, risks of, accusations of stuffing the ballots, and then the risk of delay, because when they come back to Election Central, we're not going to have results at 8:10. So we have risks, and we're still, those issues have not entirely been resolved. We are still working on what the 2017 election will look like.
What I expected to hear was, here's doing it, here's not doing it, here's doing it as a mixture. And here are the risks of each.
Mhm.
Help us decide what to do. I mean, it seems like this is being presented as a conclusion rather than here are the risks, and this committee helps you decide that result. Well, we just got into those, but I recognize those. Another option in between is you do everything the way you would normally do it, and then you save all those ballots, and they're saved, and you recount them as a check with this machine. You shove them through the RFP2 scanner, and you see if you had any different result. And if you do, you know what to look for.
You could certainly do that. And in fact, you could have room to do that because recall that you have a window of time between the election day an actual certification where you're getting the late arriving absentees and so forth, so.
Right, it's a
if there
great
are
reality
resources-
check to
Yeah.
then, at your own time, say, we did it and it came within
That's-
5 votes and everything's
that's
great.
right, so-
Or it identified one precinct that we looked at again.
Yeah, if the clerk's office has the right resources and staffing available to do that, they could certainly do that. That would be a great check.
That's the kind of options I'd like us to have the pluses and minuses so we can make that decision.
Makes sense. Well, we're getting low on time, Dennis, continue down.
Sure. So RFP 2 is development tabulation. RFP 3 is the outbound printing and mailing. Because recall now, instead of having a bunch of different ballots available at all the different precinct locations and the absentee voting centers, you're actually mailing a ballot to a specific voter. So we have an RFP for that. That is contingent on knowing how the final vendors line up on 1 and 2, because we have to make sure that the paper requirements and the ballot size and the envelope and all that stuff are all ready to go. So it's in draft, but it's on hold, and since we are looking at not having full vote by mail until next year, we've got a little bit more time on that one. The election center space, we've identified a space. We've toured that with the assembly chair and vice chair, and Mr. Peterson's seen it. We have entered into negotiations. We've identified the improvements we want. They have a counter that's supposed to be coming to us in terms of the estimates and the costs. I haven't received the counter yet, so we're in process, and when that's sufficiently far enough along, we'll be bringing that back to the assembly for approval.
It's in Ship Creek.
Yes, it is. The ballot.
What's the address on that so far?
Street address, I don't remember. It's basically if you go down onto, is it Ship Creek Avenue, you've got the hotel on your left as you're going down to the east. Maybe on the left-hand side, it's kind of like a purplish trim
Okay.
on it. There's a DMV IT shop in there. and
Two-story building.
Two-story, yeah.
Fairly modern.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's been vacant for a long time, which helps.
Concrete.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Let's see, the ballot drop boxes, you may recall that we had one that we put out last year that got well used without any fanfare or advertising at the Fairview Rec Center. All of those are now here in town. They're out at the Northwood shop. They need to get labeled and have the concrete bases put on them and then placed come election time. And we're going through the process of getting the approval from the property owners for those spaces. We're all lined up. The last little piece is getting the Parks and Rec Advisory Commission to give us their
Do you want us to help you
concerns.
try and do that?
We're all set.
The idea would be, I mean, it's mainly mail, but there would be 5, 10, 20 drop boxes?
There are 12 of them, and some jurisdictions about the same size actually have even more than that. They just use smaller ones. They use a combination of big ones and small ones. So we're trying these larger ones and what we think or what we hope will be well-used locations. And this first year is a temporary install. Some property owners don't want permanent. And frankly, for us, we'll see how they get used. If the location isn't well used, then maybe we'll move it somewhere else where maybe it gets better traffic. So the school district seems to be really happy because instead of having, if you will, going forward anyway, the school district doesn't have to worry about security in terms of having 60 schools open to people coming in and out to vote. Now they're down to 6 high schools and it's all outside. So they like that. UAA has been real cooperative. We have one at their sports center.
6 high schools and 6 other locations is what you're
Pretty much, yep.
doing. Okay.
Let's see, signature gathering solutions. So the state database does not currently have all the signatures of all the voters that we needed to have. They've been working towards getting more signatures. What was our last number? Maybe 60,000 statewide. That's a little bit outdated now because I've gone through the primary process, but we're working on a solution where we can actually scan into the system signatures that we already have. Say, for example, from the last local election, say, for example, from the upcoming general election, so we can really boost that state database. And the state's been working with us to identify what it is they need. We're working with Xerox, so they can help us develop the solution. The state had a vendor that worked their system, but that vendor wanted, what was it, 150, 125,000. Xerox is more like 5,000. So that's why we're working with the local people here with Xerox. So we're making progress there.
I just want to throw something out here for just as an item. It's really great working with the state, and we always haven't had a great relationship working with the state, but Dennis is doing a great job with their IT department on this signature solution. as well as he mentioned earlier that we have a state employee on our RFP review committee. And I just want to make sure that you understand how important this is, because we believe, and Mr. Trainee has been very encouraging and very supportive of this, we hope that by going to vote by mail, that the state goes to vote by mail. And that's why we've been working really hard to have them involved in picking out the equipment, because we think they could use it if they make that decision. So unfortunately, as Dennis mentioned, that has contributed to some of the delays, but we think in the long run, it's really gonna pay off.
Can I
So,
ask with that? So this is now gonna put it past the effective date of a potential PFD voter implementation. That is, when we had 17, even if they voted in November, it wouldn't be effective, wouldn't be rolling through the system.
The
But
ballot initiative?
yeah, but if it passes this year now with an April 18,
Well, the way the law currently reads, the State Department of Elections can already request from the PFD database for signatures. I mean, they can already get data from PFD.
this is gonna make it
Any state
mandatory.
agency
It's gonna
can.
re-register.
Yeah, and that will make it,
So is that,
mandatory, but I'm
has
not
that
sure if
changed
it'll
your
work.
estimates? That is,
It's gonna make it a better system.
It'll
well,
make
it's
a better
gonna make it a
system,
bigger
yeah, for
system.
sure.
Very probably, you're gonna have X more number of voters in Anchorage than you had before.
Yep.
So does it change all your baseline numbers if we move to 18? By
Not-
20% or whatever we estimate it's gonna be?
We're not making any assumption of how successful that'll work, for a couple of reasons. One, we don't know how the timing's gonna play out for us. And number two, we're envisioning a system, and it's similar to what other jurisdictions are going to, which is you have more than one signature on file for each voter. Because that makes it a lot easier and faster for us to determine whether or not this signature on the envelope consistently matches these other signatures. When it's just one-to-one, it looks a little off. Well, your signature might not be the same today as you signed it yesterday, you were in a hurry, you wrote it different, whatever it is. And so, first year, you're gonna have a lot of scenarios where we are not sure, we're gonna pull that envelope and we're gonna start making phone calls to work with the voter to determine if that's them. Okay, the first year is hard in that way, because you're gonna have so many of these. But if the state's initiative works well, and also the state is already pulling DMV signatures if the voter agrees, building the signature database from that angle, while we're also doing our part to build the municipal level signatures so that we can use more than one signature. If we're able to do that, all the better. Far less.
I asked a much simpler question.
Yeah.
You likely would have had 100,000 votes, now you have 150. Are you putting that into your calculations, any estimate? I guess you can wait till November now that we have the time and see what happens.
Yeah.
But it does seem like it affects all kinds of things, but it affects the raw numbers. We expect, and it's hard to tell, a whole bunch more registered voters by PFD registration than the normal process.
Right, I would say on that though, we don't expect significantly higher turnout based on that in the first year.
Right.
But I would say you probably, Anchorage, if there's going to be a place in the state
Yeah,
where,
that's a
where voting spikes, it's going to be Matsu, Fairbanks, and Anchorage. Because what we think it's going to do is re-register a bunch of people who are currently registered in the rural areas
Yeah.
to where they actually live.
Right.
So I don't think he's wrong. You probably could see 10 or 20% more than you otherwise
And
would.
I would say, to answer your question, is what we did in terms of developing the RFP is we made sure that these systems were scalable.
Yeah.
That we didn't say it has to run 100,000.
Right.
We said it's gotta run more than 250,000 at minimum, and the machines can do that and then some. They're pretty easy to scale up.
What is sort of, if we have the machines that we're currently looking at from the RFP,
Yeah.
what is the maximum number of votes we could realistically process in a realistic time frame for an election? Could we actually handle like Oregon or California through these machines?
I don't know about California on one machine. It's a question of how much can the memory hold before we have
Right.
to pull it off, and I have to go back and look. In terms of the processing speed, you're talking thousands per minute, so it just takes a little bit longer to
Yeah.
run 150,000 than it does 100,000. That's
There's-
not a big deal, but
And there's a
Yeah.
lot of jurisdictions like King County and Seattle, they have 1.2 million
Yeah.
registered voters that are engaged
And
in.
they
And
do
this-
one big machine?
And we're getting the same machine service?
Well, not specifically the same, but like this is the equipment that we're looking at.
Cool. I'm just saying, like, I think a more relevant question is if the state comes to us in a year or two or a few years
Yeah.
and says, we want to use your machines, will we have to buy new machines or can we scale these up to their size?
we won't have to buy new machines. We can use what we have. The only difference might be right here, what you do is you set up a number of workstations where election officials are looking at the signatures, right? So you might have 3 workstations, or you might have 10,
Yeah.
depending on how many ballots you're trying to process and how fast.
Sorry, I
you would
believe-
you would scale up there a little bit.
We have 2
Petition,
minutes.
my goal has always been to start doing this, to eventually, once we get perfected, deal with the Matt Sue, we could do their elections, we could do the state's elections, once this equipment's set up. Allows us to upscale it, hand it anybody's election. Nobody else will have that type of a system in the state but us.
Can you do 7, 8, 9 in 2 minutes?
Yeah, so the AO draft is ready for review. We're going to do that after this meeting, later this afternoon. So once it's done, as far as our review, then we bring it to this committee and go through that process. Communications, we talked about this a little bit already. One of the hurdles we ran into is Solstice is now out. That was the media placement you guys had under a city contract. My understanding is no longer in business, and I don't know the status of the city acquiring a new vendor for that purpose. But what we want to do as part of our media campaign is to make sure we place media with somebody who's professional and knows all the best ways to get that out there and look at what's cost effective. That's pretty straightforward. We've talked about meeting with the various different groups, including the assembly, the state and so on.
Legislative.
The clerk's office is already working on their worst case scenario planning, the staffing plan for both vote by mail and their traditional election process. We've already been working on procedures to implement this, and those will develop further once we have the known vendors in place, push button A, click on button B, that sort of thing, so that the election officials know how to use the machinery and we have a process in place for wherever there's a manual process. Need to configure the lease space, get the improvements done, supplies, equipment placement, get the signatures loaded, and then of course the testing and mock elections. All that planning is ongoing right now.
Well, great, thank you. We've run out of time for today's meeting, and we'll be meeting again the 4th Wednesday of next month. I don't know what that date is right now, but we'll be sure to communicate that with you.
Just real quickly, yeah, so I'm a newcomer on this. I appreciate all the hard work that's been going on. I mean, my frustration, to the extent you see it, is I've been talking down the old system publicly in a lot of places, saying why we needed to spend significant resources on the new system and bragging about the advantages it would have. And now I'm going to have, I would have liked to known before when this decision was made, that because I have in the last 3 weeks or months told that to people. And now I'm going to have to tell them that I was wrong about that, and that I didn't know what was going on, because we're now going back to a system that I've been denigrating for a long time, and that I think has serious flaws. So that's the frustration, both knowing about it and being in a place I didn't want to be. And fixing some communication I made that now is incorrect.
We're working on that message, and we will communicate with you, and that's why Dennis was talking about professional. We're looking for professional advice so that we communicate that right, and we'll be in touch ASAP to let you know what that message is going to be and
That's
how
to the
we're going
public.
to
It
do
doesn't
it.
take a professional advice for you to tell me earlier that this wasn't going to happen. I mean, that's just us knowing. But we do have this other one. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Move to adjourn.
All right.